One thing in particular that Disney and its fans love to do is create backstories for their favorite characters, specifically the antagonists. It seems that, more often than not, the major villain in most Disney films is given a deep backstory with the simple goal of showing the audience what drove them to this point in their lives, and to hopefully make the audience sympathize with their actions. Some of Disney's most popular movies have actually been centered around this premise alone, and they have done massively well for themselves. Take Maleficent, for instance. Fans loved those films because they added depth to dark characters, making them more relatable. Now, despite how successful the format of giving the antagonist of popular Disney movies their backstory, there is one among them who seems to get less love than the others, despite fans longing to know what made her into the witch we see her as in The Little Mermaid. We are, of course, talking about Ursula, the evil sea witch. In The Little Mermaid, we see Ursula as the highly intelligent and cunning villain, whose only goal is to take the throne from King Triton by any means necessary. We also learn that, though she once worked with the king in some capacity, she had been banished, but they don't go into a huge amount of detail as to what happened that might have put her into that position. Despite this, and thanks to some clever fans out there, we may actually have a solid backstory that explains who the real Ursula is, as well as some interesting connections she has to Ariel herself. But not just in her creepy sea creature form, but also her human form as Vanessa, because contrary to popular belief, she might not have always been the purple Cecaelia Sea Witch we see her as in the movie. The first important step in understanding who the real Ursula is requires us to first take a look at the connection between Ursula and King Triton. Even though Disney never really made their relationship or history clear, the movie was filled with strong hints that there was something there. At some point in their past, the two were clearly connected in some way, which ultimately led to them being at odds with one another, with Ursula trying her best to usurp the throne. Now, here is where it gets a little complicated, because where it stands, it seems like fans are divided here. Turns out that there are two possible avenues that fans have taken with how King Triton and Ursula are related to each other. Some believing that Ursula was the scorned ex of the King of the Seas, while others believe that the two are related to one another as brother and sister. Now, both of these ideas do have some solid evidence to support them for sure, but it seems to us that one holds a bit more weight than the other. For instance, taking a look at the scorned ex-lover theory, we know that Ursula lived in the palace at one point in her life, and during that time, she lived well. That's made apparent by the fact that during her time there, she apparently had fantastical feasts, which is something that only royalty, or those respected by royalty, would be accustomed to within the inside of the palace, meaning that if she was respected in one way or another, this would have been before she turned into a morbidly obese sea witch. Remember, according to Ursula, she used to be a beautiful mare person just like Ariel and her family, so it wouldn't be much of a stretch if you combine that with the fact that she was treated well, to say that she and Triton were once in love, and possibly even betrothed to one another. But during her time with Triton, she was also secretly apprenticing for a different sea witch. This caused Triton to sense that something was amiss, and once he discovered her secret, he ended up banishing her. At least, that's how the theory goes. And it is believed that this enraged Ursula, causing her to focus on her training even more, and once she had become more powerful, it was her time to kill her mentor and become the one and only Sea Witch, with her only goal in mind after that to take over the throne from her former lover. Meanwhile, while she had been busy getting more powerful, Triton had found love again, and he and his new wife started a family together. From that point, it was only a matter of time until the events that we saw in The Little Mermaid. This theory does hold some ground, but we follow the latter theory, stating that King Triton and Ursula are actually siblings. And here's why. Not only would it still line up with the idea of Ursula being treated well while she stayed within the palace, but it's also an idea that is backed up by the DVD of The Little Mermaid, which was released in 2006. You see, the DVD contained bonus material that showed some earlier drafts of the movie and the story, and there was one draft that included the idea of a brother and sister relationship between the king and Sea Witch. And though this never made it into the final cut of the film, most fans perceive it as being canon in the story, so much so that the Broadway adaptation of the movie even brings up the bloodline connection. And this actually connects us to our next theory as well, which lines up directly with the idea of Ursula being Ariel's aunt. As we mentioned a second ago, and this Redditor would agree, their familial bond is, for the most part, considered canon. This has led the Redditor to come up with a really interesting theory that Ursula, much like her niece Ariel, was once in love with a human. Only her mortal love was a pirate from Neverland. That's right, we are talking about Captain Hook. And yes, it does seem like a stretch when you first hear it, like what? But actually, we were pleasantly surprised by some of the supporting facts in this theory as well. Like, if you take a look at her, the way Ursula is disguised when she's pretending to be the human Vanessa. If Ariel looked the same way as a human that she did when she was a mermaid, with the exception of having legs, of course, it would seem pretty safe to assume that Ursula would take on her original mermaid form when she turned herself into a human, right? Meaning that the way she looks like Vanessa is, in theory, what Ursula looked like before her evil practice turned her into the hag-like witch we see her as underwater. Now, as the Redditor points out in their theory, there appears to be mermaids in Neverland, or at least there were. We actually mentioned this in one of our previous videos as well, which included a theory pointing out the fact that you can see Ariel's mom in Peter Pan. If you haven't seen it, you should definitely check it out. But either way, this then begs the question, is Atlantica somewhere near or a part of Neverland? And how would someone like Captain Hook, who is an adult, end up in a place where children never age? Well, the idea is that, while she was still young and beautiful, Ursula, in her mermaid form, happens upon a human in distress, someone who had suffered an accident at sea, perhaps even someone who had possibly lost his hand to a crocodile attack. That person is Captain Hook, of course, and after finding him, it is believed that Ursula saved him. And as she helped him heal, she began to care for the young captain and soon found herself head over heels in love. Or should it be head over fins? Because remember, she's still a mermaid at this point. Regardless, the sister of Triton was smitten and would do anything to be with her newfound love, hence why she began practicing witchcraft. She wanted to turn herself into a human so that she could be with Captain Hook, and lo and behold, she was able to find her legs and join him on land. After the two spent more time together, they would end up getting married, which would be when Hook would have wanted to meet her family. Awkward, but necessary, I guess. And as the theory would go, Ursula would ultimately agree to this and lead Hook and his crew to Atlantica, where the family lived. Once he was led to the den of the merpeople, is when everything changed for the supposedly happy couple. Captain Hook turned on his lover and chained her to the deck of his ship so that she could watch as he hunted down any mermaid he could sink his hook into. Okay, let's stop here and just mention that we admit there really isn't a reason as to why Hook would do such a thing, especially if he had supposedly fallen in love with Ursula at this point. But if you stretch your imagination, a lot of reasons are possible. We know that Hook was obsessed with capturing Peter, so it is entirely possible that once he discovered the merpeople, he got a little fanatic with them too. Maybe he had a hunger for power and saw all of the power that the Triton held, and he wanted it all for himself. Who knows? But one thing to point out with this part of the theory is that Hook capturing the merpeople, for whatever reason, also supports the theory that Hook is the one who killed Ariel's mother, whether on purpose or on accident. And of course, having his wife killed on the spot, along with his kingdom being under attack, King Triton would have used his power to rise to the surface and wreak havoc on those who terrorized his waters. Triton saw his sister chained to Hook's ship and destroyed it, saving his sister and leaving the wrecked ship behind. And though he had his sister back, as king, he would have to seek out punishment on his sister for bringing death to his kingdom's doorstep. But instead of execution, Triton decided to banish his sister and cursed her to take on the form of an octopus. And it's in that form that Ursula practiced her witchcraft even more, and would lay and wait for her opportunity to exact her revenge. And to wrap up the theory, only a few of Hook's crew members, along with the man himself, survived Triton's attack. But when they washed up, they were in a place that they had never seen before, the shores of Neverland. And it's there that they've been stuck, never able to escape. This would certainly explain where Triton's hatred toward anything from the surface world came from, especially humans. And it would also explain why he hates Ursula so much, despite the two clearly having a history. It would also give us some insight as to how Ursula knows so much about humans and life above the water. And it explains why she jumped at the opportunity to help Ariel find love on the surface. It would mean getting back at King Triton in the most ironic way. This theory has so much depth, it's really hard to believe that it's only a theory. That's not all though. We do have one more theory that would leave Ursula with just as much hatred in her heart for King Triton than the last one. And this one also involves lovers. As we said, when Ursula takes on her human form, she calls herself Vanessa. Well, what would you say if we told you that she got her idea for how to look from somewhere other than an old mirror? This theory claims that instead of looking like Vanessa when she was a mermaid, Ursula actually met a human named Vanessa who looked just like that. And this Redditor believes that the two might have actually been in love. You see, the idea is much like Ariel and Prince Eric's story. Ursula found love in the shape of a human, but being a part of the kingdom of Atlantica meant that Ursula would have to put the safety of her people above all else. That includes her own feelings. This made a young Ursula feel torn. However, at the end of the day, she would have chosen her kingdom. And for what? Only to end up being cast aside and banished to live out her days as an octopus creature? I mean, if that were me, I would want revenge too. This would also add another layer to her disguise when she acts like a human and calls herself Vanessa. If the theory is true, it would mean that when she took on the face of her former lover, it was almost as if she had a chance to have her back for a short time, even if it was only an illusion. Now, there are a lot of different possibilities and theories out there surrounding Ursula and her backstory. Fans clearly want to know what turned her into the evil mastermind storyline that we see her as in The Little Mermaid. Out of the theories that we went over today, our favorite has to be the one that considers the idea of Ursula being Triton's sister, especially considering the fact that it ties into the Peter Pan universe. It's always fun when things cross over, and the fact that it lines things up for Ariel's mom theory seems like a hole-in-one. It just lines up too perfectly. This isn't to say that we didn't enjoy the other theories though. They all certainly hold weight in their own ways, and each one has a ton of evidence to support them. But what do you guys think? What was your favorite out of the theories we went over today? Or is there one of your own that we neglected to mention? Be sure to let us know in the comments down below. As for now, that's all Disney fans. Let us know what video you'd like to see next in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more magically packed videos.